Welcome back to Meteorology Matters. I'm your host, Rob Jones. And you know how we do it. For more weather insights, you can follow me on Instagram, Meteorologist, on TikTok, TV Meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you can also find our Meteorology Matters playlist.
Sounds good.
This time, we're going to be talking about some pretty intense weather events that are happening right now and how they kind of intersect with some surprising political developments.
Yeah, it is a fascinating and honestly a bit of a concerning situation.
Yeah.
We've got severe flooding events that are impacting several states right now in the Ohio Valley. And at the same time, there's this political controversy brewing over the future of the agency that provides disaster relief.
It's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
So why don't we just start with the floods themselves? We're seeing widespread devastation in Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. And it's one thing to hear about flooding, but it's another to imagine entire homes just submerged, people needing to be rescued from rooftops in towns being almost completely evacuated.
Oh, yeah.
The town of Rives in Tennessee had to be almost completely evacuated.
Wow.
It's just incredible.
It really highlights the raw power of nature and how quickly a situation can become dire.
Yeah.
In this case, it all started with Hurricane Helene. Most people think hurricanes are just a coastal problem, but what many don't realize is that the remnants of these storms can travel far inland and bring tremendous amounts of rainfall.
Helene was a beast of a storm, and even though it weakened as it moved inland, it dumped over 7 inches of rain in some areas.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of downpour can quickly overwhelm any drainage system, leading to these disastrous floods.
And to make matters worse, these areas just went through a major hurricane scare with Helene back in September of 2024. Couple that with the devastating wildfires out in Los Angeles recently, and it really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
The costs of these disasters are astronomical.
Speaking of costs, let's talk about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's the agency that's tasked with helping communities recover from disasters, providing funding, coordinating relief efforts, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But there's some serious political turmoil surrounding FEMA right now, and it couldn't come at a worse time.
It's certainly a controversial situation. President Trump just started his second term last month, and one of his first moves is to initiate a review of FEMA. And to add fuel to the fire, his Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has publicly recommended getting rid of FEMA the way it exists today.
Hold on, get rid of FEMA. Isn't that the agency that literally steps in when disaster strikes to help people put their lives back together? We were just talking about these devastating floods in Kentucky. And guess what? Kentucky is one of the states that voted for Trump in the recent election.
It is a bit ironic, isn't it? And it raises so many questions. What would it mean for people in disaster-prone areas if FEMA were to disappear? Would states be able to handle disaster response on their own?
I mean, think about the financial burden alone. Disasters are incredibly expensive, from rebuilding infrastructure to providing temporary housing and assistance to those who've lost everything. Could states really shoulder that burden without federal assistance?
It's a valid concern, and the numbers paint a pretty clear picture. Between 2015 and 2024, FEMA provided a whopping $31 billion in aid to states that voted for Trump, compared to $7 billion for states that voted Democratic. That's a significant disparity.
Wow, that really puts things into perspective. So we've got these intense floods that are causing immense hardship, and at the same time, the future of the agency that's responsible for helping these communities is hanging in the balance. It's a lot to process.
Absolutely, and it brings up a critical question. What happens next? What are the different scenarios we might see unfold regarding FEMA? Is complete dismantling really on the table, or are we talking about restructuring and potentially shifting more control to local officials?
And how would any of these changes, big or small, impact the effectiveness of disaster relief efforts? I mean, speed is often of the essence in these situations, and we can't afford bureaucratic delays when people's lives are at stake.
Exactly. There's a lot to unpack here, and it's important to consider all the potential ramifications. But before we dive deeper into that, there's another crucial element we need to address, one that's intricately connected to the increasing frequency and intensity of these extreme weather events.
You're talking about climate change, right? It's the elephant in the room, and I think we need to address it head on.
Exactly. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's happening now, and we're seeing the consequences unfold before our very eyes. These intense floods, the devastating wildfires, the increasingly powerful hurricanes, they're all part of a larger pattern.
Yeah, I've been a meteorologist for over 20 years, and I can tell you firsthand the weather patterns are changing, and not for the better. We're seeing more extremes, more records being broken, and it's putting a strain on our communities and resources.
And the science is very clear on this. A warming climate leads to more extreme weather events. Warmer air holds more moisture, which means heavier rainfall and increased risk of flooding. Warmer temperatures also create drier conditions, which fuel wildfires and make them spread more rapidly.
It's not just about the immediate devastation of these disasters, but also the long-term consequences for our planet and future generations. I think it's important for people to understand that this isn't just about politics, it's about our collective future.
Absolutely. And it ties back to the FEMA discussion in a profound way. If we're going to face more frequent and severe disasters, we need a robust and effective system in place to help communities prepare, respond, and recover. That's what FEMA is supposed to do.
Right, it's about providing that safety net that assures that when disaster strikes, there will be help available. But if we're uncertain about the future of FEMA, it adds another layer of anxiety to an already stressful situation.
It's understandable that people are feeling anxious, and it's not just about FEMA's existence, but also about its potential restructuring. What would it look like if more control were given to local officials? Would that streamline the process or create more bureaucratic hurdles?
And how would states handle the financial burden if federal funding were to be reduced or eliminated altogether? Would we see a situation where wealthier states are better equipped to handle disasters, while poorer states are left struggling to recover?
These are all critical questions that need to be carefully considered. But beyond the policy debates and political maneuvering, there's something we all need to focus on, regardless of what happens with FEMA.
You're talking about personal preparedness, right? We can't just sit back and wait for the government to save us when disaster strikes. We need to take responsibility for our own safety and well-being.
Exactly. Personal preparedness is paramount. Everyone should have a plan in place, an emergency kit ready to go, and a clear understanding of the risks specific to their area. Whether it's hurricanes, floods, wildfires, or any other natural disaster, knowing what to do in an emergency can literally be the difference between life and death.
It's not about being alarmist. It's about being realistic. And it's not just about physical preparedness, it's also about mental and emotional resilience. These disasters can be incredibly traumatic, and it's important to have resources and support systems in place to help people cope in the aftermath.
You know, this might seem like a strange thing to say, but I find it fascinating how meteorology intersects with so many other aspects of life: politics, economics, social justice, and even psychology. It's not just about predicting the weather, it's about understanding its profound impact on human society.
Yeah, it's true. It underscores the importance of what we do as meteorologists. It's not just about telling you whether to pack an umbrella or not. It's about providing information that can empower people to make informed decisions to protect themselves and their communities.
Exactly. And in a world where climate change is making extreme weather events more frequent and intense, that role becomes even more crucial. We need to be more than just weather forecasters. We need to be educators, communicators, and advocates for a more resilient future.
Well said. I think that's a perfect segue into the final part of our conversation, where we'll address listener questions and explore some potential solutions to the complex challenges we've discussed.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully we've provided some valuable insights and sparked some thoughtful conversations. So stay tuned for the final part of our Meteorology Matters podcast.
And don't forget to follow me on social media for more weather updates and insights. You can find me on Instagram, Meteorologist, on TikTok, TV Meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you can also find our Meteorology Matters podcast playlist. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back to Meteorology Matters. We've been talking about some heavy stuff, folks: the intense flooding in the Ohio Valley, the political whirlwind around FEMA, and the looming reality of climate change.
It's a lot to take in, but what we want to focus on now is what we can do about it. It's easy to feel helpless in the face of these huge challenges, but I truly believe that even small actions can make a difference.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about solutions. I'm curious, from your perspective, where do we even begin?
Well, it all starts with awareness. We've talked about this a bit already, but educating yourself about the specific risks in your area is crucial. Are you in a flood zone, a wildfire-prone area? Understanding those risks is the first step to being prepared.
Right. Knowledge is power. And once you know the risks, you can start taking action. What are some practical steps that people can take to prepare for potential disasters?
Having a plan is key. Where will you go if you need to evacuate? How will you communicate with family members? Having these things figured out in advance can make a world of difference when the pressure is on.
Yeah?
And of course, everyone should have an emergency kit stocked with essentials like food, water, first aid supplies, and important documents.
And don't forget about your neighbors, especially those who might be elderly or have special needs. Checking in on each other, especially during and after a disaster, can be incredibly helpful and even life-saving.
Absolutely. Strong communities are more resilient communities, and that community spirit can also translate into broader action, like advocating for better infrastructure, supporting policies that address climate change, and holding our leaders accountable for making smart decisions about disaster preparedness.
One thing that we haven't touched on yet is the role of technology. It seems like there's a lot of potential there, both in terms of predicting these events and responding to them more effectively.
There is. Advances in weather forecasting, early warning systems, and communication technologies are all playing a vital role. Think about the power of social media to spread information during emergencies, or how smart photos can alert you to an approaching storm. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And then there's this whole field of climate adaptation, designing our communities and infrastructure to better withstand the impacts of climate change. We're talking about building more resilient structures, restoring natural ecosystems that can act as buffers against storms and floods, even relocating communities out of harm's way.
Right? It's about being proactive, not just reactive. It's about recognizing that the world is changing and adapting our approach to disaster preparedness and risk management.
It feels like we're on the cusp of a major shift in thinking, moving from a "we'll deal with it when it happens" mentality to a more preventative and sustainable approach.
I agree. And it's not just about governments and institutions, it's about each of us taking ownership and doing what we can to create a more resilient future.
So as we wrap up this episode of Meteorology Matters, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, but the key takeaway is this: we are not powerless. There are things we can do both individually and collectively to build a more resilient future. It starts with awareness, with education, with a willingness to engage and to act. And remember, even small steps can make a big difference.
Well said.
And for more weather insights, you can follow me on Instagram, Meteorologist, on TikTok, TV Meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you can also find our Meteorology Matters podcast playlist. Thanks for listening, everyone. CCEA.